Right so. I'm Anna Mitchell, 38 years old, and apparently the family scapegoat. Fantastic. Before we dive into this absolute carnival of dysfunction, please do subscribe to the channel and write in the comments what time it is where you are now. Because nothing says family bonding quite like crowdsourcing your global audience whilst your relatives plot your demise. Lovely stuff. Now then, Christmas dinner. Lincoln, Nebraska. The most wonderful time of the year, they say. Who's they? Exactly. Clearly people who've never spent the holidays with my lot. Picture this. I'd spent literal hours preparing the sort of meal that would make Mary Berry weep with pride. My hands were practically falling off from all the work I'd poured into keeping this family afloat. Not just the dinner, mind you. Everything. The mortgage. The utilities. Their entire bloody existence, really. But there I was, playing happy families like a proper mug, thinking perhaps this year might be different. Perhaps this year, they'd notice that I'd basically become their unpaid banker, therapist, and general dog's body all rolled into one utterly exhausted package. Silly me. The table was buzzing with that particular brand of forced holiday cheer that makes you want to stick your head in the oven. And then my dad's voice sliced through the noise like a particularly vindictive butter knife. You are just a burden. We want to live without you. Get out right now. Merry bloody Christmas to you too, Dad. The words hit like a slap. Except a slap would have been more dignified, wouldn't it? At least a slap has the decency to be over quickly. This just hung there in the air, like a particularly noxious fart that everyone pretends not to notice. My mum sat there giggling, mind you, swirling her wine glass like she was auditioning for the Real Housewives of Lincoln, Nebraska. Apparently, watching your husband eviscerate your daughter is peak entertainment when you're 3 Merlots deep. My sister stared at her plate with the intensity of someone who just discovered the secrets of the universe in her mashed potatoes. Anything to avoid my eyes. The guests froze, forks hovering midair like some twisted game of musical statues. My chest burned with that special cocktail of rage and humiliation that only family can properly brew. But did I let a tear fall? Did I bollocks? I stood, grabbed my coat, and walked out into the biting Nebraska night with my head held high and my dignity somewhat intact. Well, as intact as one's dignity can be after being ceremoniously ejected from Christmas dinner like last week's spin collection. My steps were steady despite the absolute chaos happening in my chest. I could hear whispers behind me. Oh yes, the gossip mill was already grinding away, but I didn't look back. Why would I? I'd given everything. My dreams, my savings, my entire bloody life for them. And this was their thanks. A public humiliation with a side of roast turkey. Delicious. Have you ever been betrayed by the ones you love most? Of course you have. We all have. It's basically a rite of passage at this point. Do share your story in the comments. Tell me where you're watching from, and hit subscribe to see how I systematically dismantled my family's entire existence. I mean, how I turned the tables. Yes. That sounds more wholesome. The next morning arrived with all the gentle warmth of a punch to the throat. I pulled into Mark's driveway in Lincoln, my suitcase rattling in the boot like my last shred of faith in humanity. Mark, my boyfriend, sane amongst men, genuinely lovely human, opened the door before I could even knock. His eyes were soft with concern, which was more than I could say for my own family's eyes, which had been soft with nothing but contempt and what I can only describe as mild amusement at my expense. You okay? He asked, pulling me into a hug. No, Mark. No, I'm not okay. I've just been voted off the island by my own flesh and blood. But sure, let's go with okay. I nodded, though my throat was doing that horrible tight thing that means tears are imminent and you're about to lose whatever remaining composure you've been clinging to like a life raft. I hadn't slept. How could I? My dad's words were still doing laps in my brain like some sort of psychological torture marathon. Inside, his small living room felt like a sanctuary. Funny how anywhere feels like a sanctuary when you've just been evicted from your own family. I could have been in a skip, and it would have felt cozy compared to that Christmas dinner table of doom. I set my laptop on his kitchen counter, hands trembling like I'd had 16 espressos, and logged into my bank account. I needed to know where I stood after walking away. More importantly, I needed to know just how thoroughly I'd been financing my own emotional abuse. The screen loaded with all the urgency of a sloth on sedatives, and my heart sank faster than the Titanic. The joint account I shared with my sister, meant for family bills, operative word being meant, was down thousands of dollars. Thousands. With an S, plural. As in, more than 1,000, which is already quite a lot of money actually. I scrolled through the transactions, my pulse racing like I had just discovered my house was full of spiders. And there it was. Multiple transfers, each labeled Rachel's boutique project. My darling sister had funneled over $10,000, pound 10,000, for those of us who prefer proper currency, into some failed fashion venture without so much as a by your leave. I managed that account. I was supposed to be in control, but I'd been too busy paying the family's electric, water, and mortgage bills, nearly $2,000 a month casual, to check it closely. She counted on that, hadn't she? Sneaky cow. I leaned back, my breath catching in that way that means you're either about to laugh hysterically or have a complete breakdown. Possibly both. Years ago, I'd poured my heart into my graphic design studio. I'd built it from nothing, brick by metaphorical brick. Clients loved my work. I was booked months out. I was living the dream, as they say. But then, plot twist, my dad's medical bills started piling up like a particularly aggressive game of Jenga, and my sister's freelance gigs dried up faster than a puddle in the Sahara. So what did I do? Did I say, "Sorry, not my problem, sort yourselves out"? Did I absolute boogery? No, I sold the studio. Sold my dream. Sold my future. All to keep the family afloat. I paid for everything. Their heat, their water, even the roof over their ungrateful heads. And they treated me like an ATM with feelings. Actually, scratch that, they treated me worse than an ATM. At least people say thank you to ATM sometimes. I got nothing. No thank you. No acknowledgement, just demands and apparently secret embezzlement. Last night proved it, didn't it? My dad calling me a burden, my mum giggling over her wine like it was all a rather amusing pantomime, my sister sitting there in silence, probably mentally calculating how much more she could nick from me. I'd sacrificed my dream for them, and they didn't care. They literally could not have cared less if they'd tried. I opened another tab, pulling up the auto payment portal for the family's utilities. My finger hovered over the screen like I was defusing a bomb. Except I wasn't defusing anything. I was about to detonate it. I thought of my dad's voice, sharp and cold enough to freeze vodka. "We want to live without you." Fine, I thought. Brilliant. Let's see how they manage then, shall we? I clicked into the electric company's site first. This was it. The nuclear option. With one tap, I canceled the monthly payment tied to my card. Gone. Poof. Just like my childhood illusions about family loyalty. The water bill was next. Cancelled. Then the mortgage. The one I'd been covering since my dad's surgery left them financially strapped like some tragic Victorian novel. I hit delete on the auto draft, and honestly, it felt glorious. My hands were steady now, steadier than they'd been in years. A weight lifted, like I'd finally exhaled after holding my breath for so long I'd forgotten what oxygen tasted like. Mark watched me from across the counter, stirring his coffee with the careful deliberation of someone who knows his girlfriend is currently engaged in financial warfare with her own family. "You sure about this?" he asked, his voice calm but searching. Bless him, always trying to be the voice of reason. I met his gaze, my jaw tight enough to crack walnuts. "They made their choice," I said, and bloody hell, did it feel good to say that. "Now I'm making mine." I closed the laptop, the screen going dark. For the first time in years, I felt a spark of control. My family thought they could push me out and keep cashing my checks like I was some sort of infinite money glitch. They were about to learn, in rather spectacular fashion, how catastrophically wrong they were. Mark set his mug down, leaning closer with that earnest expression that made me fall for him in the first place. "You don't have to go through this alone," he said. I nodded, grateful beyond words, but my mind was already racing ahead. I'd given up my studio, my savings, my entire bloody life for them. No more. Not another penny. Not another moment. Not another ounce of my soul. I pulled out my phone, checking job boards for freelance design gigs. I needed to rebuild, and I wasn't waiting for their apologies. Mainly because hell would freeze over before those materialized, and I didn't fancy waiting that long. My sister's betrayal stung deepest, if I'm honest. She'd taken my money, my trust, and said absolutely nothing whilst our dad threw me out like yesterday's rubbish. So no, I wasn't just cutting their bills. I was cutting them out of my future. Entirely. Permanently. With surgical precision. I stood, pacing Mark's kitchen, my resolve hardening like cement in the sun. The family's house, their lights, their water, it was all on them now. I'd spent years carrying their weight, believing it was my duty, my responsibility, my burden, ironically enough. But duty doesn't mean being used. Duty doesn't mean being a doormat with a debit card. Duty doesn't mean sacrificing yourself on the altar of other people's incompetence. I glanced at my phone again. A new email popping up like a little beacon of hope. A potential client. A small business needing a logo. It wasn't much, but it was something. It was a start. It was mine. I looked at Mark, his steady presence grounding me like an anchor in a storm. I'm done being their safety net, I said, my voice firm enough to convince even myself. He nodded, a small smile breaking through. Good man. I turned back to my laptop, ready to take the next step into whatever fresh hell or heaven awaited me. Preferably heaven, but I wasn't picky at this point. 2 days later, I sat on Mark's sofa, my mind still reeling like a drunk on a roundabout. Mark sat beside me, his hand resting on mine in that comforting way that doesn't fix anything but somehow makes it slightly more bearable. Talk to me, he said, his voice steady as a rock. Steady as he always was. Annoying, really, how stable he was. Made the rest of us look emotionally unhinged by comparison. So I let it spill. All of it. The betrayal. The years of paying their bills like some sort of masochistic philanthropist. The way my sister stayed silent whilst I was publicly humiliated in front of the entire Christmas gathering. My voice cracked. Damn it. But I kept going. The weight of it all came pouring out like a burst dam. And once I started, I couldn't stop. I gave up everything for them, I said, and Christ, hearing it out loud made it sound even more pathetic than it felt. And they called me a burden. Mark leaned forward, his eyes serious in that way that meant he was about to say something profound and irritating in its correctness. You know, he started, and I braced myself for the incoming wisdom. I had a mate back in college. Of course he did. There's always a mate from college. His parents leaned on him for money, used his savings for their debts, then blamed him when things went south. He kept giving, thinking it would earn their respect. He paused for dramatic effect. It didn't. He only got his life back when he stopped. He looked at me with those earnest eyes. You deserve better, Anna. Set your boundaries now, or they'll keep taking. Forever. Until you're a dried-up husk of a human being with nothing left to give. His words hit hard, like a door swinging open onto a truth I'd been avoiding. I'd been trapped in their cycle for so long. Always the one to fix things, to pay up, to sacrifice. The perpetual rescuer. The eternal mug. Right then. Enough was enough. I grabbed my laptop, my resolve sharpening like a knife on a whetstone. The auto-payment portal was still open from when I'd canceled the main bills. But there were smaller ones left. Internet. Phone. Even my dad's car insurance. All tied to my account. Naturally, because apparently I'd been running a charity for fully grown adults who should have been able to sort their own bloody lives out. I logged in, my fingers moving fast, faster than my doubts could catch up. One by one, I shut them down. Click, click, click. Each cancellation felt like cutting a chain, breaking free from shackles I'd worn, so long I'd forgotten they weren't actually part of my body. The phone bill was last. I hesitated for approximately half a second, then hit confirm. No going back now. They wanted to live without me. They could start immediately. Trial by fire. Or in this case, trial by complete absence of utilities and basic services. My phone buzzed almost instantly, because of course it did. My dad's number flashing like a warning light on a particularly knackered car. I braced myself and answered, preparing for the onslaught. Anna, what's going on? He barked, his voice sharp enough to cut glass. The lights are out. The water's off. What did you do? What did I do? What did I do? Oh, I don't know, Dad. Maybe I stopped paying for your entire existence. Just a thought. I gripped the phone, my heart pounding like a drum solo, but my voice was steady. Surprisingly steady, actually. You said I was a burden, Dad. You told me to get out. I'm just giving you what you wanted. Independence. Freedom. The joy of managing your own affairs. You're welcome. He sputtered. Actually sputtered. Like a broken engine. You're overreacting. Turn it all back on. Now. Overreacting. That word. That bloody word. It stung, but I didn't flinch. Women are always overreacting, aren't they? Never responding appropriately to genuinely terrible behavior. Always overreacting. You chose this, I said, my tone cold enough to freeze nitrogen. You don't get to demand my help anymore. That ship has sailed. Bon voyage. I hung up before he could respond, my hands shaking but my mind clear as crystal. Mark nodded from across the room, a quiet pride in his eyes that made me feel about 7 feet tall. I opened my laptop again, this time to job boards. My graphic design studio was gone, sold off like everything else I'd valued, but I still had my skills. Skills they couldn't take. Skills that were mine. I scrolled through listings. Logos, branding, website mock-ups. A local coffee shop needed a menu redesign. A startup wanted a full brand package. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, a flicker of excitement cutting through the anger like sunshine through storm clouds. I drafted an email to the coffee shop, attaching my portfolio with trembling fingers. It was small, but it was mine. I wasn't just cutting ties with my family. I was building something new. Something that couldn't be taken away, or sold off, or used against me. Mark brought me a coffee, setting it on the table with the gentle care of someone handling explosives. You're stronger than they'll ever know, he said. I managed a small smile, the first in days. Felt weird, actually. Like using muscles I'd forgotten existed. My sister's betrayal, my dad's demands, they couldn't touch me here. Not in Mark's flat, not in this new space I was carving out for myself. I sent another email, this time to the startup, my confidence growing with each keystroke. A week later, my phone lit up with my sister's name. I was in the kitchen, sipping coffee, trying to focus on a logo sketch for a new client. The phone glowed with her name like a warning sign. Should have let it go to voicemail. Should have blocked her entirely. But no, apparently I'm a glutton for punishment. I hesitated, then answered, because I'm a masochist. Rachel's voice came through sharp and accusing, like nails on a chalkboard dipped in vinegar. You're so selfish, Anna, she spat, and I could practically hear the spittle flying. You cut us off without a word. Do you know what you're doing to Mom and Dad? Selfish. Selfish. After everything I'd given, after every sacrifice I'd made, after she'd literally stolen 10 grand from me, I was selfish. The absolute brass neck of it. I clenched my jaw, her words sparking anger that threatened to explode out of my face. Rachel, I said, my voice low and dangerous. I know about the money. 10,000 pounds siphoned off for your failed fashion project. You thought I wouldn't notice. You thought I was too busy being your personal ATM to check. Silence hung on the line like a dead body. Awkward, heavy, damning silence. Then she scoffed. Actually scoffed. You're making this about me. Typical. 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 I could hear her typing in the background, probably already drafting her next social media sob story about her terrible sister who abandoned the family in their hour of need. You took my trust, I said, each word deliberate. You don't get to lecture me about anything. Ever. You've lost that privilege. I hung up, my pulse hammering like I just run a marathon. Good riddance. 2 days later, because apparently my family operates on some sort of rotating harassment schedule, my mum showed up at Mark's door. Mark let her in, his face tense but polite, because he's a better person than me and hasn't yet learned that politeness is wasted on these people. Susan stood in the living room, her hands twisting together in that performative distress way that women of a certain generation do so well. Anna, she pleaded, her voice shaky with what I can only assume was genuine panic. We're struggling. The bills are piling up. The house payment's late. Please turn the services back on. Her eyes were red, but I saw no regret. No apology for that night. No acknowledgement that perhaps, just perhaps, they treated me appallingly. I leaned against the counter, arms crossed like a bouncer at a particularly exclusive club. Mum, I said, my tone even but firm, you laughed when Dad told me to get out. You sat there, giggling into your wine glass, whilst he called me a burden. Rachel used my money, stole from me, and you said nothing. Not a word. So this is on you. Not me. Susan's face crumpled like wet tissue paper. We're family, she whispered, as if that magic word would suddenly make everything better. Family doesn't abandon each other. I shook my head, genuinely amazed at the cognitive dissonance. You abandoned me first, I said. I'm done carrying you all. I've been done. This is just me making it official. She left, her shoulders slumped in defeat, but I felt no guilt. None. Not even a smidge. I'd spent years bailing them out, years sacrificing, years being taken for granted. No more. That evening, my phone buzzed with notifications like a swarm of angry bees. I opened Facebook, first mistake, and there it was, pinned at the top of Rachel's profile like a declaration of war. Some people turn their backs on family when they need them most, it read, and I could practically hear the violin playing. Anna Mitchell thinks she's better than us, leaving her parents and sister to struggle. Shame on her. My stomach twisted, not from hurt but from pure, unadulterated fury. She painted me as the villain, twisted the entire truth to save face, conveniently leaving out the part where she'd embezzled 10 grand and they'd publicly humiliated me at Christmas. I scrolled through the comments. Neighbors, old friends, even distant relatives I'd forgotten existed, all chiming in with their utterly uninformed opinions. How could she do that? One wrote, as if they had any bloody clue what actually happened. Ungrateful, another said. Yes, I'm ungrateful for being used as a human cash machine. Spot on. My cousin Brian had shared the post, adding his own commentary. Heard they're barely getting by now. Thanks, Brian. Really helpful contribution there. The post was spreading like wildfire through Lincoln's tight-knit community. Each share chipping away at my family's reputation like a sculptor with a particularly aggressive chisel. Mark sat beside me, his hand on my shoulder, steady as always. They're lashing out because they're desperate, he said, ever the voice of reason. I nodded, but the sting of Rachel's words lingered like a bad smell. I could have posted my side. I could have told everyone how I'd paid their bills for years, how Rachel stole from me, how they threw me out. I could have defended myself. But I didn't. Let them talk. Let them gossip. Let them create their narrative. I wasn't the one hiding the truth. Eventually, lies unravel. Eventually, the truth comes out. Eventually, people figure out who's really at fault. I refreshed the page, watching the comments pile up like a car crash in slow motion. A local business owner I'd worked with messaged me privately. Is this true? I thought you were better than that. I didn't reply. What was there to say? Lincoln was small, gossip traveled faster than light, and my family's name was sinking faster than the aforementioned Titanic. And they had no one to blame but themselves. I turned off my phone, focusing on my laptop instead. Another client email had come in, a boutique needing a website redesign. Brilliant. Perfect distraction. I drafted a response, my fingers steady on the keyboard. Rachel could scream on social media all she wanted. She could rally the troops, gather the pitchforks, organize a bloody protest march for all I cared. I wasn't backing down. Not now. Not ever. My family thought they could guilt me into returning, that their public shaming would work, that I'd come crawling back like a beaten dog. But their words no longer held power. They'd used up all their ammunition, and I was still standing. I glanced at Mark, who was scrolling through his phone, frowning at the post like it had personally offended him. You don't need their approval, he said, looking up at me. You're building something better. I nodded, a quiet strength settling in like foundations being laid. The community might judge me now, might believe Rachel's sob story, might think I'm some heartless cow who abandoned her struggling family. But I'd show them who I was through my actions, not their lies. Time would tell the real story. 3 weeks later, my family's world was crumbling like a biscuit in tea. Quite fitting, actually. Word reached me through a mutual friend, because this is how information travels in small towns, like some sort of gossip postal service, that their house in Lincoln had gone dark. No electricity, no running water. A foreclosure notice was taped to their front door like a scarlet letter, the bank's red ink screaming, unpaid debts for all the neighbors to see. My sister's so-called boutique project had collapsed entirely. Shocking, that. Who could have predicted that a fashion venture funded by embezzled money and zero actual business acumen would fail? Not me. Oh wait, She'd lost a major design contract with a local retailer. Apparently, when you can't deliver on your promises because you've spunked all your funding up the wall, clients get rather tetchy about it. They'd locked her out of her office space for non-payment of rent. Poetic, really. My dad, desperate and finally understanding what consequences meant, had taken up odd repair jobs. Fixing leaky faucets, patching drywall, the sort of manual labor he'd spent his entire life believing was beneath him. The pay was barely enough for groceries, let alone saving their home from the bank's clutches. I heard it all secondhand, each detail tightening a knot in my chest. Not guilt. Absolutely not guilt, but a dull ache for the parents I'd once idolized. The people I thought they were before I realized who they actually were. My phone buzzed relentlessly, like a particularly annoying mosquito. Rachel's name flashed first, because of course it did. "Anna, you've ruined us," she shouted when I picked up, her voice dripping with that special blend of desperation and blame that only family can properly achieve. No power, no water. How could you? How could I? How could I? The sheer audacity. "You took 10,000 pounds for your project," I shot back, my tone sharp enough to slice through her bullshit. "You don't get to play victim now, Rachel. That ship has sailed. Actually, it's sunk. It's at the bottom of the ocean with the Titanic." She hung up, her silence louder than her words. Good. Then my dad called, his voice rough and desperate. "Anna, please." "David," I said, cutting him off before he could properly start his guilt trip. "First name basis now. We'd moved past, Dad. You told me to get out. You called me a burden in front of everyone. I'm not your bank anymore. I'm not your anything anymore." He tried again, softer this time, attempting a different tactic. "We're losing everything." I swallowed hard, my throat tight, but my resolve didn't waver. "You lost me first," I said, and ended the call before he could see me cry. Each rejection felt like laying bricks in a wall I was building around myself. Solid but heavy. Necessary but painful. I turned my focus to my work, the one thing I could actually control. My laptop glowed with new emails like little beacons of hope in a sea of family drama. Clients needing logos, flyers, website mock-ups. The coffee shop I'd pitched to in Lincoln had signed on, absolutely thrilled with my menu design. A startup sent a contract for a full branding package, their feedback brimming with praise that actually meant something because it was earned, not obligated. I worked from Mark's dining table, sketching ideas, tweaking color palettes, losing myself in the creative process. Every completed project fueled a fire in me, a sense of strength I hadn't felt in years. Possibly ever. I wasn't just surviving. I was rebuilding, piece by bloody piece, the life I let my family take away. Another call came. Rachel again, because she's nothing if not persistent in her victimhood. "Please, Anna," she begged, her voice breaking in that way that's meant to tug at heartstrings. "We're drowning. Just pay the electric bill. Just that one. Please." I gripped my phone, my resolve unwavering like granite. "You made your choices, Rachel," I said, each word deliberate. "Live with them." "I did. 4 years, I lived with your choices. Now it's your turn." I hung up, my hand steady but my heart doing that twisting thing that means you're sad but also absolutely certain you're doing the right thing. Complex emotions. Aren't they delightful? I thought of my mum, picturing her in that dark house, stumbling around without electricity. Her silence at that dinner table still stung like a fresh wound, still echoed in my mind during quiet moments. I loved them once. Deeply, genuinely, completely. But love doesn't mean letting them use you like a renewable resource. Love doesn't mean setting yourself on fire to keep them warm. I pushed the thought aside, opening a new design file with the ruthless efficiency of someone who's decided to move forward regardless of the past. A local bakery needed a logo, and I dove in, sketching curves and flourishes, losing myself in the work until the ache in my chest faded to a manageable hum. The news of my family's struggle spread through Lincoln like gossip in a small town. Which is to say, immediately and with great enthusiasm. A neighbor texted me, asking if the rumors were true. Lights off, house at risk, family in crisis. I didn't respond. What would I say? Yes, it's all true, and I'm the architect of their downfall. That would go down well. My dad's repair jobs weren't enough to save them. Rachel's reputation as a designer was tanking faster than her boutique project, especially after her contract fell through, and word got out about why. They were paying the price for their choices, just as I'd paid for mine all those years, pouring my savings into their lives like water into a bucket with a massive hole in the bottom. I felt a pang, small, manageable, thinking of my parents' faces, their pride unraveling like a cheap jumper. But I'd given enough. More than enough. A lifetime's worth of enough. I sent an invoice to the startup, my bank account growing with every job. Each pound was mine, earned by my hands, my skills, my work. Not theirs. Not taken from me. Not demanded or expected or guilt-tripped out of me. Mine. I leaned back in my chair, staring at my latest design. The bakery logo was bold, vibrant, exactly what they'd asked for. I smiled, a quiet pride settling in like a warm blanket. My family's chaos was theirs to fix now. I was done being their crutch, their safety net, their perpetual rescuer. I saved my work, sent the file off into the digital ether, and checked my email for new leads. A small museum in Lincoln wanted a brochure. Another opportunity, another step forward, another proof that life existed beyond my family's drama. I wasn't looking back. Looking back was for people who hadn't spent years being exploited. 2 months later, I heard my family had sold their house. Well, sold might be generous. More like, the bank repossessed it, and they had to accept whatever scraps were offered. They'd moved into a cramped rental apartment on the outskirts of Lincoln, a far cry from the home I'd kept afloat for years with my money and my sacrifice and my apparently boundless capacity for self-destruction. The news came through a former neighbor, her voice hushed over the phone like she was discussing a particularly scandalous funeral. "Your dad and sister are barely speaking to anyone," she whispered, as if volume control made the information less tragic. "And your mom's keeping to herself." I set my phone down, a flicker of sadness passing through me like a brief summer shower. But it didn't linger. Couldn't afford to let it linger. I'd carried their burdens long enough, and my shoulders were finally starting to unhunch. That evening, my phone chimed with a voicemail from my mom. I stared at it for a solid minute, debating whether to listen or just delete it sight unseen. Curiosity won. It always does. I played it, and her voice came through soft and halting, like someone reading a hostage statement. "Anna, I'm sorry for what happened at Christmas," Susan said, and I could picture her twisting her hands as she spoke. "We shouldn't have treated you that way. I hope you're okay." No mention of fixing things. No acknowledgement of the years I'd sacrificed. No real apology for the specific actions, the giggling, the silence, the complicity. Just words. Empty, late, utterly insufficient words. I deleted the message without replying, my heart steady as a metronome. I'd spent too long waiting for apologies that changed nothing, for acknowledgments that never came, for the bare minimum of human decency from people who should have given it freely. My focus was elsewhere now. On myself. On my future. On things I could actually control. I'd been pouring my energy into rebuilding my career like someone possessed. After weeks of freelance gigs, logo here, website there, branding package everywhere, I took a leap that would have terrified me months ago. I rented a small office space downtown, a corner unit with enough room for a desk, my design tools, and my gradually recovering sense of self-worth. I named it Mitchell Design Studio, a nod to the dream I'd lost years ago when I'd sold my soul to keep my family afloat. The first day I walked in, keys jangling in my hand like a tiny celebration, I felt a rush of pride so intense it was almost embarrassing. This was mine. No one could take it away. No one could guilt me into selling it. No one could use it against me. Mine. I set up my laptop with the care of someone handling a newborn, hung a few sample prints on the walls. Nothing fancy, but professional enough, and got to work like my life depended on it. Which in a way it did. A local bookstore had hired me for a branding overhaul. Logo, signage, even a website. The whole package. Their owner emailed me daily, practically vibrating with excitement about my initial drafts. It was refreshing, actually, working with people who appreciated my efforts rather than viewing them as an infinite resource to be exploited. Another client, a Lincoln gym with more enthusiasm than sense, wanted posters and social media graphics. My inbox was buzzing like a caffeinated bee, each project a step towards something bigger, something that belonged entirely to me. Mark was there every step of the way, bless him. He helped me move my equipment into the office, lugging monitors and boxes up the stairs whilst I supervised and occasionally carried things that weren't too heavy. Partnership, you see. "This place is perfect," he said, wiping sweat from his brow like some sort of removal man in a rom-com. I smiled, genuinely grateful for his unwavering support. We'd grown closer these past months, our bond deepening through late-night talks, shared meals, and the mutual understanding that my family was absolutely mental and best avoided. One evening, as we grabbed coffee at a cafe near my new office, because I was now the sort of person who had an office near which one could grab coffee, very sophisticated, he reached for my hand across the table. "You're unstoppable," he said, his eyes warm with that particular kind of affection that makes you feel simultaneously wonderful and slightly uncomfortable because British people aren't supposed to be good at emotions. I squeezed his hand back, feeling a spark of joy I hadn't known in years. Possibly decades. With Mark, I wasn't just rebuilding my career. I was building a life. An actual life, not just an existence spent funding other people's mistakes. I spent my days sketching, tweaking designs, and meeting clients who treated me like a professional rather than a cash dispenser. The bookstore owner stopped by one afternoon, practically glowing with delight at the new logo's bold lines. The gym sent a glowing review and immediately booked me for another project. My bank account was growing, not from family demands, not from guilt, not from obligation, but from my own work. Revolutionary concept, that. I thought briefly of my sister, her failed boutique now a distant memory, like a bad dream that fades upon waking. My dad struggling in that small apartment, doing manual labor he'd always considered beneath him. Their choices had led them there, not mine. Their decisions, their consequences. Simple, really. I pushed the thought away, focusing on a new email that had just pinged into my inbox. A museum wanting a series of exhibit posters. Exciting stuff. I dove in, sketching concepts, my mind alive with ideas that had nothing whatsoever to do with family drama. Mark joined me at the office one afternoon, bringing takeout from my favorite taco place because he's thoughtful like that. We sat on the floor like students, laughing over spilled salsa, planning a weekend hike because we could do things like plan weekend hikes now that I wasn't perpetually stressed about other people's utility bills. "You've come so far," he said, his voice soft but proud, like a teacher watching a particularly dim student finally grasp long division. I nodded, a warmth spreading through me that had nothing to do with the spicy salsa. My studio was small, hardly the empire I'd once envisioned, but it was a start. My clients were local, not international, but they trusted me. They valued me. They paid me on time. Revolutionary. And Mark, he was more than a boyfriend now. He was my partner in every sense. Emotional support, furniture mover, taco provider, voice of reason. The full package. I looked around my office, the walls still mostly bare but full of possibility. This was my new beginning, and I was ready for it. More than ready. Absolutely gagging for it, actually. 6 months later, I was fully on my own. My family had faded into silence like a poorly written character being written out of a soap opera. No more calls, no more desperate pleas, no more guilt trips. Just silence. Blissful, peaceful, occasionally unsettling silence. I'd heard through the grapevine, because Lincoln's grapevine was more reliable than the actual postal service, that my cousin Brian was still stirring the pot like some sort of gossip chef, whispering to anyone who'd listen about the Mitchells' downfall, their struggles, their dramatic collapse from comfortable middle-class existence to cramped rental apartment living. Their name carried a shadow now in Lincoln, a cautionary tale, a reminder of what happens when you treat people appallingly and those people finally grow a spine. I didn't care to correct the rumors. Let them think what they wanted. My focus was elsewhere, on my life, my studio, my future. The holy trinity of not giving a toss about other people's opinions. I'd cut every tie to my past, and for the first time in my entire 38 years, I felt free. Properly free. Not just I've left home free, or I'm financially independent free, but genuinely, existentially, gloriously free. My days were filled with work at Mitchell Design Studio. Clients kept coming like some sort of design-hungry parade. A cafe needed a new sign. A nonprofit wanted a campaign logo. A school asked for event flyers. My office buzzed with energy, my sketches piling up on the desk like evidence of an actual career. I'd built something real, something mine, something that couldn't be taken away or sold off or guilt out of my hands. From the ashes of the life I'd lost, or rather, the life I'd voluntarily incinerated, I'd created something better. Every contract signed, every invoice paid, every satisfied client was a victory. A small up yours, to the universe and to my family, and to everyone who'd ever doubted that I could manage on my own. Lincoln's community was starting to know my name, not as the daughter of that struggling family, not as the ungrateful cow who abandoned her parents, but as Anna Mitchell, graphic designer, owner of Mitchell Design Studio, someone who actually delivered quality work on time. Novel concept. One evening, Mark took me to our favorite park by the Sunken Gardens. The air was warm, the sky streaked with pink like some sort of romantic film backdrop. He was quieter than usual, his hand gripping mine with slightly more intensity than normal. Suspicious. We stopped by the pond, the water glinting under the fading light like something from a postcard. He turned to me, his eyes steady and serious. "Anna," he said, and my heart did that thing where it speeds up because you know something significant is about to happen. He pulled a small box from his pocket, and I thought, "Oh, here we go then. You've rebuilt everything on your own terms," he said, his voice steady despite his hands shaking slightly. "I want to build a life with you." He opened the box, revealing a simple silver ring. Nothing ostentatious, nothing ridiculous, just right. My breath caught, not from surprise. I'm not thick, I'd seen this coming, but from the weight of his words, the significance of the moment, the sheer bloody relief of having someone in my life who actually valued me. I nodded, tears prickling my eyes in that annoying way that makes you look like you're having an allergic reaction. "Yes," I whispered, because apparently I temporarily lost the ability to speak at normal volume. He slipped the ring on my finger, and we stood there, wrapped in each other like some sort of romantic cliché, the world fading away. And you know what? I didn't even mind the cliché. Sometimes clichés are clichés because they're actually quite lovely. We planned a small wedding, just us and a few close friends in that same park. Nothing elaborate, nothing expensive, nothing designed to impress people we didn't particularly like. Simple. Authentic. Ours. On the day, I wore a white sundress. Nothing fancy. No designer labels. No thousands of pounds spent on a dress I'd wear once. It felt right. It felt like me. Mark stood under a canopy of oaks, his smile brighter than the June sun, looking at me like I was the only person in the world. We exchanged vows, promising to support each other, to build a life of trust, to not behave like my family, basically. The ceremony was short, 15 minutes, tops. The reception just a picnic with music and laughter and people who actually gave a toss about us. I looked around at the faces surrounding us. Friends who'd cheered my journey, who saw me for who I was, who didn't expect me to fund their entire existence. My family wasn't there, obviously, and I didn't miss them. Not even slightly. Not even that little pang you're supposed to feel when your parents aren't at your wedding. Nothing. Just relief and happiness and a sense of rightness. This was my new beginning, surrounded by people who valued me, who lifted me up, who didn't treat me like a human ATM with abandonment issues. Later, as we danced under string lights like something from a fairy tale designed for adults with realistic expectations, I thought about the road I'd traveled. The journey from doormat to functional human being. From family ATM to person with boundaries. I'd given everything to a family who took me for granted, who called me a burden when I finally stopped giving, who painted me as the villain when I prioritized my own well-being. Walking away was the hardest thing I'd ever done. Genuinely. Nothing else even came close. But it taught me something vital, something I wish I'd learned decades earlier. You have to set boundaries to protect yourself. You have to stand up, say no, choose people who lift you up instead of dragging you down into their chaos like crabs in a bucket. Mark was that person for me. Steady, kind. Never asking me to be less than I was, never expecting me to sacrifice myself for his benefit, never treating me like anything other than an equal partner. The bar was low, admittedly, but he cleared it by miles. My studio, my clients, my life, they were proof I could rebuild without their weight crushing me. Proof that I was more than just their safety net, their backup plan, their last resort. I want to leave you with this, because apparently I've become the sort of person who imparts wisdom. Family doesn't mean obligation. Blood relation doesn't equal unconditional servitude. DNA doesn't grant people the right to exploit you. It's okay to walk away from those who hurt you, to build a life with people who see your worth, to prioritize your own mental health and financial stability over familial expectations. I did it, and I'm stronger for it. Happier, certainly. Less stressed, definitely. Better off in every measurable way. If you've faced family conflict, how did you find your way through? Share your story in the comments. I'd love to hear how you reclaimed your life, set your boundaries, escaped your own dysfunctional nightmare. Misery loves company, after all, and I'm always here for a good, my family's mental tooth story. Subscribe if you haven't already. Like if you enjoyed this tale of familial dysfunction and personal triumph. Share if you know someone who needs to hear that it's okay to put themselves first. And remember, you're not the villain for refusing to set yourself on fire to keep others warm. You're just smart. Right then. That's my story. Anna Mitchell, graphic designer, wife, studio owner, former family doormat, current boundary-setting champion. I walked away from toxicity and built something better. You can too. Now, seriously, what time is it where you are? Drop it in the comments. I'm genuinely curious about my global reach. And also it's a nice distraction from the lingering emotional complexity of having completely cut off my entire family. 1 year after the wedding, life had settled into something resembling normality. Well, as normal as life can be when you've systematically dismantled your family's entire existence and rebuilt your own from scratch. Mitchell Design Studio was thriving, proper thriving, not just barely keeping afloat, thriving, with a client list that would make my former self weep with joy. I'd hired an assistant, an actual employee, someone I paid a salary to. Me. The woman who'd once been so skint after funding her family's lifestyle that she'd eaten beans on toast for dinner 3 nights running. Now I was someone's boss. Life's funny like that. Mark and I had moved into a proper flat, not his bachelor pad where I'd hidden like a refugee from my own life, but our place. 2 bedrooms, a kitchen that didn't make you want to weep, a living room with actual furniture we'd chosen together. Adult stuff. Terrifying, really. But here's the thing nobody tells you about cutting off toxic family members. The guilt doesn't just disappear. It lurks. Like a particularly persistent house spider that keeps reappearing no matter how many times you chuck it out the window. I'd be sketching a logo, completely absorbed in my work, and suddenly think, I wonder if Dad's managing. Then I'd remember he told me I was a burden in front of a room full of people, and the guilt would transform into something harder, sharper, more sustainable. Righteous indignation, I believe it's called. One afternoon, I was at the studio when my phone buzzed with an unknown Lincoln number. I should have ignored it. I'd learned my lesson about answering unexpected calls. But apparently I'm still enough of a masochist to think, oh, what's the worst that could happen? Anna! A voice I didn't immediately recognize. It's Brian. Your cousin. Ah yes, Brian. The gossip extraordinaire. The one who'd shared Rachel's post with such enthusiasm. Brilliant. What do you want, Brian? I asked, my tone flat enough to iron shirts on. Look, I know things have been complicated, he started, which was a diplomatic way of saying an absolute shit show. But your mum's not well. Thought you should know. My stomach dropped like a stone. Define not well. Nothing life-threatening, he added quickly, apparently sensing my panic. But she's struggling. Mentally, I mean. Depression, the doctor said. Your dad called me because they don't have anyone else. The irony wasn't lost on me. They pushed me away, and now they had no one. Consequences. They're a real bastard, aren't they? I appreciate you telling me, I said carefully, but I'm not sure what you expect me to do about it, Brian. Maybe visit. Just once. I'm not saying you need to fix everything, Anna. I know what happened wasn't right. But she's your mum. There it was. The magic phrase. She's your mum. As if biological connection erased everything else. As if DNA was more important than years of being used and discarded. I hung up, promising nothing, and sat staring at my desk for a solid 10 minutes. Mark found me like that when he stopped by with lunch, because he's annoyingly thoughtful like that. What's wrong? He asked, setting down sandwiches that I suddenly had no appetite for. I told him about Brian's call, about Mum, about the guilt that was creeping back in like mold in a damp flat. Mark sat beside me, his hand finding mine. "What do you want to do?" he asked. Not "what should you do?" or "you have to do this." What did I want? Novel concept. I don't know, I admitted. Part of me wants to tell Brian to sod off. They made their choice. But another part. I trailed off, because admitting you still care about people who treated you appallingly feels like a weakness. Another part still loves them, Mark finished. That's normal, Anna. That's human. It doesn't mean you have to do anything. It doesn't mean you're weak. It just means you're not a sociopath. 1 year after the wedding, life had settled into something resembling normality. Well, as normal as life can be when you've systematically dismantled your family's entire existence and rebuilt your own from scratch. Mitchell Design Studio was thriving, proper thriving, not just barely keeping afloat, thriving, with a client list that would make my former self weep with joy. I'd hired an assistant, an actual employee, someone I paid a salary to. Me, the woman who'd once been so skint after funding her family's lifestyle that she'd eaten beans on toast for dinner 3 nights running. Now I was someone's boss. Life's funny like that. Mark and I had moved into a proper flat, not his bachelor pad where I'd hidden like a refugee from my own life, but our place. 2 bedrooms, a kitchen that didn't make you want to weep, a living room with actual furniture we'd chosen together. Adult stuff. Terrifying, really. But here's the thing nobody tells you about cutting off toxic family members. The guilt doesn't just disappear. It lurks, like a particularly persistent house spider that keeps reappearing no matter how many times you chuck it out the window. I'd be sketching a logo, completely absorbed in my work, and suddenly think, I wonder if Dad's managing. Then I'd remember he told me I was a burden in front of a room full of people, and the guilt would transform into something harder, sharper, more sustainable. Righteous indignation, I believe it's called. One afternoon, I was at the studio when my phone buzzed with an unknown Lincoln number. I should have ignored it. I'd learned my lesson about answering unexpected calls, but apparently I'm still enough of a masochist to think, oh, what's the worst that could happen? Anna! A voice I didn't immediately recognize. It's Brian. Your cousin. Ah yes, Brian. The gossip extraordinaire. The one who'd shared Rachel's post with such enthusiasm. Brilliant. What do you want, Brian? I asked, my tone flat enough to iron shirts on. Look, I know things have been complicated, he started, which was a diplomatic way of saying an absolute shitshow. But your mum's not well. Thought you should know. My stomach dropped like a stone. Define not well. Nothing life-threatening, he added quickly, apparently sensing my panic. But she's struggling. Mentally, I mean. Depression, the doctor said. Your dad called me because they don't have anyone else. The irony wasn't lost on me. They'd pushed me away, and now they had no one. Consequences. They're a real bastard, aren't they? I appreciate you telling me, I said carefully, but I'm not sure what you expect me to do about it, Brian. Maybe visit? Just once. I'm not saying you need to fix everything, Anna. I know what happened wasn't right. But she's your mum. There it was. The magic phrase. She's your mum. As if biological connection erased everything else. As if DNA was more important than years of being used and discarded. I hung up, promising nothing, and sat staring at my desk for a solid 10 minutes. Mark found me like that when he stopped by with lunch, because he's annoyingly thoughtful like that. What's wrong? He asked, setting down sandwiches that I suddenly had no appetite for. I told him about Brian's call, about Mum, about the guilt that was creeping back in like mold in a damp flat. Mark sat beside me, his hand finding mine. What do you want to do? He asked. Not what should you do, or you have to do this. What did I want? Novel concept. I don't know, I admitted. Part of me wants to tell Brian to sod off. They made their choice. But another part. I trailed off, because admitting you still care about people who treated you appallingly feels like a weakness. Another part still loves them, Mark finished. That's normal, Anna. That's human. It doesn't mean you have to do anything. It doesn't mean you're weak. It just means you're not a sociopath. I managed a weak laugh. Low bar, that. Maybe, he said, squeezing my hand. But here's the thing. You can acknowledge that your mom's struggling without making it your responsibility to fix. You can feel sad about it without reopening that door. Compassion from a distance is still compassion. Wise words from a man who'd watched me rebuild myself piece by piece over the past year. I didn't visit. I didn't call. But I did send a brief text to Brian, hope she gets the help she needs. I can't be that help. It felt cruel and kind simultaneously, which seemed about right for the situation. That evening, Mark and I sat on our balcony, because yes, we had a balcony now, very posh, drinking wine and watching the sunset like people in adverts for retirement plans. Do you regret it? He asked quietly. Cutting them off. I thought about it properly. The question deserved a proper answer, not just a knee-jerk response. No, I said finally. I regret that it had to happen. I regret that they pushed me to that point. I regret that they couldn't see me as anything other than a resource. But cutting them off, that saved my life, Mark. Maybe not literally, but I was drowning. For years. And they just kept piling more weight on me. He nodded, understanding in that way he always did. I think, I continued, finding my thoughts as I spoke, that people confuse love with tolerance. They think loving someone means accepting whatever they do to you. But that's not love. That's just fear of being alone, maybe. Or guilt. Or obligation. Real love, the kind worth having, requires respect. Boundaries. Basic human decency. Very philosophical for a Wednesday evening, Mark said with a slight smile. Sod off. I said affectionately, nudging him with my shoulder. We sat in comfortable silence, and I realized something. I was happy. Genuinely, properly happy. Not miserable, not just getting by, but actually content with my life. My studio, my work, my husband, my little flat with its ridiculous balcony. I'd built this, not from my family's foundation, but from my own strength, my own skills, my own refusal to keep accepting crumbs when I deserve the whole bloody cake. My phone buzzed again. Another message from Brian. She's asking for you. I read it, felt the familiar pull of guilt and obligation, and then did something revolutionary. I put my phone on silent and returned to my wine. Some doors, once closed, should stay closed. Some bridges, once burned, should stay ashes. Some families, once escaped, should remain in your rearview mirror where they belong. I wasn't the villain in this story. I was the survivor. And survival, I'd learned, sometimes looks like selfishness to people who benefited from your self-destruction. I could live with that. Cheers.